Hi, everybody. Hello. Thank you all for being here. I'm Isabel Elizondo, the Green Finance Advocate at Natural Resource Defense Council, where I lead the Green Bank Network. Before we start our event, I want to first provide a thank you to our host, A&O Sherman. They've hosted us for the last 3 years in this event, and they've always been a really big part of our success. So thank you to them. Next, I want to give a little bit of context for the Green Bank Network for those who aren't as familiar with what we do. The Green Bank Network, which was founded in 2015, is a membership organization that fosters collaboration and knowledge exchange among existing green banks. Through our network, our members can share best practices and lessons learned. Our network is made up of 8 green banks across the globe, including Australia Clean Energy Finance Corporation, the State Development Bank of Minas Gerais, Connecticut Green Bank, DC Green Bank, New York Green Bank, New Zealand Green Investment Finance, Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank, and Tata Clean Tech Capital Finance. NRDC is the secretariat of this network, where we help coordinate events, organize knowledge exchanges, track bank transactions, and learn a lot and get really excited about the innovative work these banks are doing. So we have an exciting event for you today. As a brief outline, we'll have some opening remarks from NRDC's CEO. Then we'll move into a fireside chat with Kavita Sinha of Green Climate Fund. And then we'll move into our 2 panels. The first panel will focus on how green banks can finance decarbonization. And the second panel will focus on how green banks finance adaptation and resilience. We'll then close out with a brief networking session, and just for some logistics, that's going to be right outside. We'll usher you out at the end of the event. So I'm happy to open this event and pass it over to NRD CEO Manish Bobnan to give some opening remarks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is that better? Oh, so 9 years ago on this day, the SDGs. A couple months later, anyone in Paris for the Paris Climate Agreement? A few people, right? What most people forget is that prior to Paris, prior to the SDGs in New York, was an incredibly important meeting in Addis Ababa on financing for development. Even back then, they knew that if we were serious about meeting the SDGs, meeting climate, that financing was going to be at the heart of the conversation. It was by far the stickiest issue back then, and it remains the stickiest issue today, right? The conversation that we're having on the substance isn't very different than the conversation we had 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. And we know that the challenge has been around how you actually can unlock finance to actually make the stuff that we have been talking about happen in practice. When we look at the numbers, right, on finance and CPI, I know there's folks here from CPI does a fantastic job in pulling this together. We've made some progress, but we know there's so much more to be done. Right, the latest estimates, whether it's 9 or 10 trillion per year for mitigation and adaptation in the world, is kind of where we need to be. We're at, I think, what, 1.3 trillion in 2021, 2022, represents a doubling of where we may have been a couple of years before that, right? But, you know, an order of magnitude from where we are. And we know that the majority of that funding is largely mitigation, largely the developed world. Right? So the work in the developing world, the work on resiliency remains a fundamental problem, a fundamental challenge. So the numbers, we know the numbers, we have a lot more to do. Some of those spaces are quite hard, Kind of the second point is, the green banks, kind of the topic of today's conversation, has seen some pretty remarkable growth over those last 15 years. And part of the green bank network has been about helping support and build the ecosystem for green banks. I actually don't know the answer to this, but the first green bank was the UK, or there's okay. Connecticut? Are we saying Connecticut? Right. We'll take the. So there's been some incredible work done, right? And some good lessons that have been learned from the green banking experience over the past 15 years. A lot of, both in terms of own lending, in terms of how you can crowd in private financing, other private financing into that work. A lot of it in the early days around a kind of clean energy deployment, but kind of broadening out. So there's been some good experience, but far from ultimately what we want to see. In the last couple of years, I think there's been a lot more attention on resiliency. The conversation on climate impacts today is so profoundly different than even 5 years ago, right? In the United States, 99% of the population in the United States was under an extreme weather alert at some point over the summer. We know what's happening all around the world, right? This is not a conversation anymore about tomorrow or some other place. This is happening today. We're at one in a, the science, the argument, and yet the challenge of actually financing resiliency, kind of building adaptation remains tough, right? And yet green banks are starting to explore, think about how we can actually do something on this knotty issue. The other kind of through line that's happening in the last couple of years is a much more serious conversation about equity, right? How do we actually make sure on the mitigation side that we actually are able to find ways to finance projects that are inclusive in nature, right? We know that a big challenge has been either foregoing or further exacerbating challenges with the most vulnerable communities. So on the mitigation side, how we think about that in a more inclusive, just transition, and how we think about that also in terms of the focus on resiliency. We see that the Bridgetown Initiative. We see conversations with the Climate Vulnerable Forum and the V20. We see that in terms of, in the United States, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, 40% of the benefits are earmarked for low-income communities. We see that the United States, here we are, may have met its pledge of $11.3 billion financing that Biden made in 2021 by 2024, and that $3 billion of that is for resiliency. We know that, if Harris were to win, this is a conversation that she's actually quite excited about. But how do we do that at the scale that's needed? These are more the exceptions rather than the rule in what is oftentimes a conversation about equity, but a lack of proof points of how to do that in practice. And that is where this conversation comes in. Green banks are at an inflection point. We're beginning to see real excitement about the role green banks can play as part of that missing middle, connecting the conversations we have about the MDBs, right? Or the broader conversations about, the trillions to what actually matters on the ground. The 14 billion in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, adding some real acceleration, some ammunition to what can be done in the United States. A lot of new green banks starting to be established all around the world. And that is kind of the moment, the inflection point that we have today about what the future of this green banking ecosystem will actually look like. And so what we have planned for this afternoon is a fireside chat that Doug is going to have with Kavitha from the Green Climate Fund around different models that the GCF is looking at in terms of how we scale up green banks. We're going to have a panel that's going to look more at the decarbonization side of the conversation, the mitigation side. and how we can actually think about scale, how we can get financing into those places that haven't received that financing, how we think about equity. And then we're going to have a panel that's going to look at that thorny issue of resilience and what are some of the proof points we're seeing and how do we kind of take that to scale. So we know, everyone kind of recognizes, finance has been and will continue to be the biggest barrier to realizing the vision of the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals. It's what COP29 is all about. It's what every conversation in New York ultimately is about. We know that in that context, some money is flowing, but it's highly concentrated on certain types of projects and in certain types of countries. And that green banks have a very important role to see how to actually connect and mobilize funding that is responsive to needs on the ground, that can move money into those areas that have been systemically neglected. And we're at a moment that is quite exciting about how we can take green banks and the broader ecosystem to scale. And that's what we hope to do today. So we are so delighted. You are at the most important event at Climate Week in New York. So thank you, everyone. And I'm now going to turn it over to Doug, who's going to talk a little bit more about the fireside panel. Thank you, everyone.
I want to ask Kavita to come up, please.
You're the side.
Oh, I'm the fire. This is the chat.
The side.
The water's over here, though. Sorry. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Is this working? No? It's green. Okay. Oh, okay. It's even more green. Hi, everybody. I'm Doug Sims. I'm Managing Director of Green Finance Economic Development at NRDC. Just so folks who don't know, NRDC is a global nonprofit environmental advocacy organization with offices all over the US and India and China. We've been around for 54 years, Manish? 54 years, and really proud to, yeah. Manish was in diapers when we founded the organization, and he was CEO immediately. Thanks for coming. We're really excited to be here. This conversation is one that I've been involved in for about 14 years since joining NRDC. And as Manisha said, it sort of evolved through that time. It's something which is really a US, UK, Japan, Australia kind of northern story about trying to crowd in private capital, mobilize private capital. And then it became a story about, can we get development banks to be more catalytic, you know, at the national and international level. And now it's really evolving to really understand how do we also deliver equity and inclusion and financing. So it's an evolving conversation and additional proof points that it works. And so I think that's the idea of the inflection point. So one thing that's really exciting is that from the very beginning of the GCF, it's really been involved in these conversations. I began engaging with GCF on this issue probably 2014. And there's been a lot of efforts to try to find the right recipe, the right formula to make these institutions viable. Just so I think it's important to know that green banks, most of them aren't depository institutes, they're not banks. It's really a kind of a catchphrase to describe more like funds that are charged with mobilizing private capital into green projects. That's the simplest definition. Most of them have been government owned or public-private partnerships. There's a few private ones like Tata Clean Tech in India that have been successful as private organizations. But that's the basic model. So today we're going to have a conversation about how the GCF sees the evolving landscape. I'll just give a couple pieces of your bio, if that's okay. Okay. Well, it's a great, incredible bio. Kavita is the current private sector facility director of the Green Climate Fund. She was the program director for energy transition in Asia with the European Climate Foundation. And while there, she helped set up the Southeast Asia Clean Energy Facility and was the interim director for Southeast Asia Energy Transition Partnership. Prior to ECF, She spent more than 15 years in leadership roles in the corporate world, from startups to multinational corporations across multiple sectors. She co-founded and successfully exited startups in clean energy and infrastructure services. Kavita also worked for nearly a decade with USAID, where she held several program management roles, including climate impact. She has an MBA from Rutgers Business School. I grew up right near Rutgers, so I'm happy to, Rutgers, yes. On an honors degree in chemical engineering, and completed her graduate studies in energy systems from leading engineering schools in India. Thank you, Kavita, for joining us today. So let's just start off with some questions about the GCF generally. Give us an overview. I mean, we all know what it is, but maybe a brief refresher. How it relates to the theme of adaptation and mitigation finance.
Thank you, Doug, for that generous introduction. And thank you, Manish, for setting the stage for this conversation. GCF, as many of you already know, Green Climate Fund was set up under the UNFCCC's as a financing mechanism to help the developing countries meet their climate aspirations and goals for mitigation and adaptation. It plays an important part for the countries to achieve their nationally determined contributions and their adaptation goals under the Paris Agreement as well. So the member countries to whom we provide financing to, about 190. That's a lot of countries for the little amount of capital that we have. The challenge there is that GCF, along with some of the other global funds that are dealing with climate issues, just less than 3% of the total so-called climate finance available for developing countries. One of the challenges then we have is how do we use our resources, the public resources that we have at our disposal, the most effectively and most efficiently to help the countries meet their aspirations and goals. Just to set the context a little bit, the countries that we work with, less than 5% of those countries' economy or the marketplace is capital market related or listed on stock exchange. People do not participate as deeply in those capital market as in the developed world. 80 to 90% of the jobs are created by MSMEs, many of them who depend on informal sectors for their financing needs. And then a lot of them are in the informal smallholder farmer sector. So the transition for them and building their resilience is something that GCF looks really closely at. And in that context, the whole suite of definitions that you just mentioned for the Green Bank is what enables us then to help the economy's transition. And that's what we are doing right now.
Can you talk a little bit about your role in the private sector facility, how that differs from other parts of the GCF?
Well, as you mentioned, I lead the GCF's private sector operations. GCF's total committed value right now in its financing is $15 billion, of which a third of it is through the private sector. So $5.5 billion is the committed financing that we've done. For the total volume of proposals that we have financed is $30 billion. The private sector's main role is to enable the mobilization of private capital, whether it is local domestic capital, whether it is local capital markets or international financing, institutional or commercial investment. And the way we do that is the board adopted the private sector strategy in 2022. And there are sort of 4 pillars that we work on. The first one is to help the country set up an enabling environment so that the policy risks and the institutional risks get lower. So that's the de-risking element there. We use a lot of grant instruments, a country readiness programming instruments to enable the countries to develop their investment planning, to look at how can they set the roadmap to meet the goals that they have to and prioritize investments. Our second pillar is about investing in MSMEs and in early startups and in enterprises so that the technologies don't have to be always transferred from north to south, but made fit for purpose enterprises from the global south can emerge and can do the job that solves the problems that they have. The third one is the biggest piece of our work, which is the de-risking large capital flows, ensuring capital flows at scale. And the final one is where this piece of work comes in is on greening the financial system. So that's where what makes us different from the public sector is that we work largely with our partners, which are either international commercial investment banks, asset managers, or domestically, which are commercial banks or national development banks, as well as our multilateral development banks as our partners. And the primary aim is to ensure that the companies, that the project that we support are first, good financially sound projects, and second, they're good financially sound climate projects.
Thank you. So you've talked about financing projects, but you're also been investing in building institutions, green banks, for want of a better word. Can you talk about why GCF is thinking about capitalizing green banks, and what purpose can they serve in the ecosystem?
I use the word projects loosely. That's and it's a catch-all phrase, just like the green banks. These are proposals that GCF puts money into. One of the first drivers, and this was in Mongolia, one of the first drivers was the greening of the MSMEs, the access to capital, where the national banks were already very stressed with debt and others, and there was not enough fiscal space for them to create the availability of the capital resources necessary for the MSMEs transition. And this was in Mongolia, where a group of private players came together along with the government to put together a new institution, because that institution did not exist, to help the MSMEs and the small enterprises start doing rooftop solar, very, very typical projects, which mitigation projects. And that's where, after doing an analysis of what the country has or not had, it was determined, based on the country's decision, that setting up a new institution would be the best way to mobilize local capital, local private capital, and the government's intent to enable the transition of their MSME sectors. And so that's where one of the first drivers was. The drivers have changed and the intent has remained the same. Large part of the section that these tend to serve are the MSMEs and the smallholders, as well as households, to enable their transition and resilience. For example, in the Blue-Green Bank in Barbados, it was completely different driver, which was that the local banking system was entirely based on subsidiaries of American and Canadian banks. Their ability to take risks, which are Barbadian risks, was dictated to by regulators sitting outside the country. The country does not have a development bank. So that was the big driver to set up a new institution. So where the intent was clear and there were no institution, that's where we seeded a new institution. We became an initial shareholder there, helped guide and shape what that bank would do, what the governance would look like, also help with generous TA support to build the capacity for the leadership there. However, if the country has a good institution and a regulatory framework, that would not be the route, the fastest route, where the development banks exist in, for example, in South Africa.
Well, let me stop you for a second. Okay. On the first model. No, this is great. I just wanted to double click on some of the things you were saying. So in the Mongolian situation, I'd like to get into some of the origin stories and some of the gaps that caused these new institutions to arise. So in Mongolia, you said that a group of entities came together with the government. Who were those? Those were banks. Who were those entities, and how does this entity in Mongolia function to serve MSMEs?
One of the entity that was a local commercial bank, Hasbank, is one of our partners, but the others were association of MSMEs who were doing in the manufacturing sector. So they wanted to bring their capital into it. So those were the two. Government came to capitalize initially. So it was a public-private partnership, and then GCF supported that. So completely, driven from the ground by the private sector, and the government responded.
So this bank didn't have the right kind of capital to serve these small entities, and the entities themselves knew that, and they came together. So what role is the bank playing in the structure now?
So bank is implementing this. The bank will put together some of its capital into it as well, and will act as the startup there and implement and bring the knowledge that it has from banking within Mongolia, along with the institutional certainty that GCF needs for ensuring that GCF safeguards and policies and others are followed through. So for us, that's a partner of choice for us.
And what does the GCF investment look like?
It is relatively small, given that Mongolia is a relatively small country. So some of the, just to give you the context, we have about $1.9 billion of committed capital in all across different models, and we'll talk about that. The smallest share of our models go into seeding the new institution, because the demand for such institutions are actually coming from very small countries who don't have the wherewithal to do that. So our capital isn't that big.
Thank you. So let's go on to Barbados. Then I think one of the newer efforts, you said that the Barbadian market was served only by foreign subsidiaries of banks. They didn't understand Barbadian risk. Talk about how its origins, how did it come together? Who were the partners bringing it to the table? And what's the strategy, and what does the investment look like on the GCF side?
But this was driven from the top. Unlike the Mongolian example, which was a bottoms-up driven strategy, this was coming out of you spoke about the Bridgetown Initiative. This was the Prime Minister Mia Mottley's understanding of what the situation was on the ground and what needed to be to enable the local saving. The country, just so you know, has humongous amount of savings, unlike Mongolia, Cambodia, or others where the savings shares are not great. This has a lot of savings, but the way the banks work there was not being allowed to take those savings into climate-enabled investments. And the government had no way to influence that because these were branches of overseas banks working under different regulations. So that was the driver for it, completely driven from the top. Also, at that time, if you realize that this was where the Barbados and some of the other SIDS countries are also in a very difficult debt stress situation. They were talking to IMF and others for RST. Because that became a driver, that if the RST comes in, the financing, and GCF supports that and ensures that the risks that Barbados faces from increasing frequency and increasing threats of climate events, and allows for that to happen internally by mobilizing the local domestic savings as well as local domestic capital, then this would enable the transition much more easily. So it was driven by a government vision. GCF's presence would allow the IMF to have the assurance that the money would go into the right place. So our frameworks of climate and our MRVs and others would give that assurance to the IMF that it needed. So that was the driver. Our strategy was to come in with a small capital base that will allow it to establish, then identify the areas that they needed to work on, which was both mitigation and adaptation. Again, unlike Mongolia, which was very mitigation, given that country is very, very manufacturing and heavy. This was from the start mitigation and adaptation, focus on MSMEs and households for building the borrowings that are needed, mortgages for resilient households, for brownfield resilience, borrowings that would be required by the house and the MSMEs for things like, strengthened roofs, more hardened, things that don't fly off, rooftop solar that they could actually bring the solar panels down home before the hurricane hit and stuff like that. So those were the innovation. The country had a huge pipeline, and that assured us that the money would go the right place. So that's where we put in about $5 million capital, very small, plus $10 million is convertible loans. So if they're able to raise more capital, we will also want it to be below 30% all the time. So if they raise more capital and becomes a bigger capital base, then we would convert that into equity. The idea is then that they would then mobilize these local capital. They're aiming for about $200 million of a pipeline per year over a 15-year period. That's a sizable amount of money. Whether that will happen or not is something that we want to wait and watch. But I think the country has taken ownership. They passed a legislation that allows this framework to work. The next steps are to actually get the license and get it moving.
So there's a policy framework that's in place. The government is the driver here. It's mobilizing, unlocking local savings. Very different model than Mongolia. So let's pivot over to some of the examples of the existing organizations that are being transformed that GCF has been working on for some time now. Tell us about those projects, please.
The other two models, I would say, so the other big model is where development banks or good financial institutions and frameworks exist, is setting up a facility within an existing. bank. So that's something that we are doing with Cambodia. The Cambodia Climate Facility, where the Agricultural Rural Development Bank is the parent, but it's a ring-fence facility that we would put together. Similarly, in Rwanda, the Rwanda Green Investments Facility, again, ring-fenced within the Rwanda Development Bank. In DBSA in South Africa, again, a ring-fence catalyst climate facility. The idea is then that that would then start building pipeline and developing a portfolio and build the experience that is needed by these established banks to understand the credit risks that come along with these type of projects. And then eventually the idea is that this facility would either be spun out as standalone, or maybe the entire bank might become green. And that's remains to be seen though. But that's, again, that was the second other model. I could talk about two others which are more traditional. One is green lines of credit. These are typical, very development finance oriented. Local commercial banks, that's where we have done a lot of it. 1:1 matching. They blend their capital with our low cost capital, longer tenor, out of market, longer tenor capital to do the green lending, very predefined of what can and cannot be financed through that. Again, the idea is to get the experience going. And the final one is through our international accredited entities, such as the French Development Bank, AFT, or the EBRD, where then they do similar green lines of credit, but rather than us doing directly with them, they go through to the local FIs and then support their transition to becoming Paris aligned. We have done one model, which is equity-based, and that's sort of unique, and I don't know whether that will pick up for future, which is the Quali Fund, which is focusing largely on second-tier and smaller financial institutions and microfinance for smallholder farmers. We've set up an equity fund with GAVA, which is the fund manager. Cofides is the accredited entity. This one will then use a step-up, step-down model. So commercial lending rates, market-based rates, and if they start transitioning their existing portfolio to Paris alignment, to net zero alignment, every 3 years they will get a step down. Or if they don't. So that's where I think collective wisdom of how do you index this? How do you ensure that there's no greenwashing? And how do you make sure there's transparency in this model? We believe within our ecosystem that this may actually unlock much more capital flow much faster than doing these specific models. So I just wanted to mention that.
So make sure I understand. So that last model, it's almost like a sustainability linked investment. So you're actually incentivized. So I guess one of the criticisms of the let's go to an existing institution is that they don't actually change anything. They take the money, they spend the money, then they go back to what they were doing before. So this is a way to try to help incentivize their real transformation.
And it's not just limited to the 5 or 10 things they would do with our money, but the entire portfolio.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I mean, looking outside of your portfolio, yeah. That's exciting, that's great. So I know it's early days, but are there any lessons learned you can tell us about, what mistakes have been made, what have been the bottlenecks? Is there a model you think that works better for certain kinds of countries?
Well, capital mobilization for the cost sharing, the co-financing that GCF needs to be able to do this is really difficult, especially if you're looking at public financing from the local governments, which are already stressed to bring in the money. So oftentimes they will depend on another party, such as the IMF or ST or something, to bring the capital. So that's one big lesson. Second is the balance between the rigor that we seek from those institutions so that our funds actually do what they're supposed to do versus their capacity to do that. That's another big one. And it's always a debate. Put too many conditions and others, then you hamstring them from even taking off. Don't put that, then you don't know where the money is going. So that's a balance that we are learning. In terms of impact, which model would work or not, I would still say it's early days. However, creating a new institution, tough as it is, if it has all the support it needs for the long term that it needs for success, I would believe that had a greater chance. I mean, this is the Clay Christensen model of, innovation. Mm-hmm. Larger organizations with established baggage and established customer bases find it more difficult to become completely new and reinvent themselves versus something new and small and start is more nimble and can do it. However, if the regulatory environment around that is not supportive, then this innovation then falls into the same trap. So having a good regulatory support and the capacity of the institutions and the people that it can attract to actually do this innovation would be very, very important for the new one. For the existing credit lines and others, these are known models, where I don't believe that they are fastest to try to get something on the ground, but whether it will completely change that country's financial ecosystem remains to be seen. But again, early days.
How much time do we have, Isabel? Do we have time for questions? No, not really. Probably not. Okay. Well, let me just close with one additional question. So what do you see on the horizon for Green Bank? I know you have a new president. She's making some changes. Are there any, I know there's an effort to streamline some of the accreditation and make some reforms. What do you see as a potential in this next phase of the GCF to help really catalyze local institutions to transform themselves or create new institutions?
Thanks for mentioning, Mafalda, the new leadership. We've really gone through a new organizational change, which means that the private sector, just like also on the public sector side, we will be doing the complete end-to-end cradle to grave, which means ideation, co-creation, and exiting. Unlike the past where the portfolio management and exit was with a completely separate department where the public and the private were commingled and they were managed very separately. And that we believe that this integrated model will allow us to learn lessons fast, close the loops faster, and be able to do much better. So I'm really excited about that part of it. In terms of capital mobilization, one of the big pillars of our GCF's vision for 50/30, which is being able to more efficiently and impactfully managing $50 billion by 2030, is capital mobilization. We've just now launched a completely new department for strategic investment partnerships and co-investment. Our new director for that will be coming on board soon. So I see us working in partnership to bring the supply side. As I said, the demand for our capital is very high. The types of innovation that people bring to us, given the high risk appetite and patient capital that we are, it much outstrips what the commitment authority we have. GCF sets itself a target to become, for the private sector to be at least 40% of the total portfolio by 2027, and then increase the share. With the integrated model, we believe we can unlock much more value through partnerships and alliances. The accreditation model is changing as well. We're looking at bringing to our board in October a much lighter accreditation framework, which will be more private sector friendly. We already launched the new project-specific accreditation approach, and that has really motivated and ignited our pipeline from the private sector. So good times ahead. Look forward to greater partnerships so that we can work more seamlessly.
So exciting. I have so many more questions, but I think we have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much for a very stimulating conversation, and good luck on the next phase.
Thank you. And I look forward to learning more lessons from how we could do things better, use our capital better. And also, if you have any ideas on how we can index our capital for greening of the financial system, that would be brilliant takeaway for me. Thank you.
We're going to have the next panel coming up on decarbonization. Isabel is moderating that. Thanks so much.
Be great to have our panel one panelist step up to the plate.
I feel pressure.
Sure.
Oh. Oh. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I can go ahead and intro our panel. Hi again. I'm pleased to welcome all of our panelists who are going to be talking about mitigation finance. Each of the banks represented in our first panel have done really innovative and impactful work on financing decarbonization solutions. This work spans across sectors from the power and electricity generation sector to the housing sector and more. I'm excited to hear what they have to say, so I'll go ahead and briefly intro them. To my left, we have Tricia Miller. Tricia Miller is the CEO of DC Green Bank and is in charge of leading team and expanding the scope and scale of the institution's climate and community impacts. She served as the senior director in the White House Domestic Climate Policy Office, where she led building and industrial decarbonization policy for the Biden-Harris administration. Then we have Aurea Carvalho. She's the sustainability manager at the State Development Bank of Minas Gerais, where she leads the development bank's work on climate finance implementation. She has expertise in sustainable finance and has led the structuring of carbon credit, distributed energy, and sustainable infrastructure projects. And then we have Kelsey Claire. She's a managing director of New York Green Bank's investment portfolio management team, where she sources, structures, and executes clean energy investments across New York State. She focuses on bridging the financing gap for projects that will decarbonize our economy, namely energy storage, clean transportation, and building efficiency. Finally, we have Jason Patrick, who's the CIO of New Zealand Green Investment Finance, where he leads the bank's finance team and invests in projects that move New Zealand to a low carbon future. NCGIF and Jason's work focuses on target sectors that include distributed energy, energy efficiency, process heat, and others. So I'm excited to kick it off with an initial question. I'm going to ask our panelists to go down the line and tell us a little bit more about their financial institution, its origin story, perhaps how the bank was capitalized, and the organization's mission and how that mission relates to mitigation and decarbonization. I think we can start from left to right.
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon with so many amazing leaders in the audience and my fellow panelists. Our origin story at DC Green Bank starts back in 2018 when Mayor Muriel Bowser and the DC Council passed the statute that created us as the DC Finance Authority, commonly known as DC Green Bank. And in the last 5 years, we've been able to really take a page from other models. I'm looking in the room, Connecticut Green Bank, with NYSEG, and so many excellent partners that have really come together, what are now about the G50 of emerging and existing green bank institutions working together across the country. This is an evolving story, and we're so thrilled to be a part of it and to have close to 4 years of operations now under our belt. In terms of your question on capitalization, we were first established with a special purpose vehicle fund that helped enable us to get up and running in those early days and to seed some projects across the areas of our work, which is really about advancing sustainability, helping support a clean energy economy, and most importantly, our mission is tied to inclusive prosperity. So everything we do and invest in, we have to ask ourselves at DC Green Bank, how are we supporting underserved communities and delivering capital that is additive in this ecosystem, right? That's going to advance our climate goals, but also is going to deliver to meet the needs of the most underserved communities. So that's been front and center since we started. And we're excited about what we can do to scale with many of you.
Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with these colleagues and all of you. BDMG, in Portuguese, BDMG, we are a subnational development bank in Brazil, and it's important to contextualize that Minas Gerais state has 20 million persons. So when you talk about the subnational banks, it's important to realize that we are considering sometimes banks that can have the impact the same as development banks in smaller countries. And that's important because sometimes we are not in the table when we discuss important issues for the financial institutions in the development field. So we are very grateful for the Green Bank Network when they opened the doors for us 3 years ago. And that's because being a development bank, it's in our DNA to, and we have 64 years to face the challenge with together with each generation. So for you to have an idea, when we started, the bank tried to mobilize capital to bring new industries to our state because we had an excessive offer in energy. So this was in the 60s. Now it's other situation, and we are trying to face the climate crisis. So looking at this, we have all the kind of clients, just companies, not actual people, just companies that go to the smaller ones, that to the SMEs, to the biggest ones. And we try to be that bank that will close the deal, that will make them go to our state, or make them start new practices. And we value a lot when we are able to do that, leading to the most vulnerable areas of the state, like the north region of our state is very dry, and it's, I will talk more about it, but that's the idea.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelsey Clare from the New York Green Bank. We were founded in 2013 with $1 billion of capital. We've since deployed $2.4 billion of capital through recycling those investments and redeploying them. Our mission is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the state and also to close financing gaps. So wherever we see developers having trouble getting commercial banks to pick up the phone, that's where we try to fill the gap. Our priority segments are set by New York State Climate Act and the Department of Public Service, which mentioned at the moment are energy storage, clean transportation, and building decarbonization. We also seek to meet a target of 40% of our investments going towards disadvantaged communities. And just generally, we respond to the market, try to lend at market rates so that we can mobilize private capital to ultimately come in and refinance us.
Thank you. Jason?
Thank you. Yes, Jason Patrick. I manage the investment work of the New Zealand Green Bank. To answer your questions, our origin story is that we were set up by the previous government of New Zealand. And one interesting tidbit I have for you is that when they sought to set up the bank, they did what I thought was a very clever thing. It attracted me to the institution, namely, they sent out some policy officials to speak to some of the existing green banks, including some people who are in the room today, to gather some lessons learned, if you will. And it was through that exercise that they really landed on what sort of mandate would be most effective for green banks in general and for New Zealand in particular. So what came out of that were a couple of really important points. One, we're a multi-sector focused organization, so we do investments in every emissions material sector in New Zealand. I could speak to some of the details on what those are and how they might be different from other jurisdictions. And most importantly, we can operate really and invest in under any capital structure. And the reason that's so important, and by that, of course, I mean we can do everything from corporate equity in early stage companies all the way through senior and sub debt, guarantees, project finance, financial product development and management. And we've done all of those things, I'm happy to say, at this point in our life. We've been around for about 5 years. The reason that's so important is, as we can get into if you like, different sectors have different levels of maturity in New Zealand, and I'm sure it's like that in every other jurisdiction. So, for example, on one end of the scale, distributed energy, it's a relatively well-banked sector, although parts of it are really in need for additional capital, and that's a point I'd love to get into more detail on. However, it's generally well-banked. So what we do is we try to accelerate that finance by focusing on elements in distributed energy, which require that sort of acceleration. So we provided, for example, a lot of subordinated debt to help projects and companies. We focused on grid investment to help renewable power projects advance, et cetera. On the other end of the spectrum, agricultural methane emissions are quite an important issue in New Zealand. And most of these solutions, as I'm sure this room knows, are not at all commercial. They tend to be R&D or very, very early stage pilot initiatives having to deal with ruminant methane emissions. And that's the reason that, for example, in the agricultural sector, though we've done some other things like energy, transport, cooling, fertilizer, for that particular issue, which is so important, we focused on essentially a VC type investment. That's been appropriate for the ag sector. And again, in contrast to other sectors like energy and transport, where we do things that help along senior banking in those sectors.
Thank you. And I'm going to touch on a little bit of some of the more specific work you do that y'all have highlighted in this first question. I'm going to start with Kelsey from New York Green Bank. One of your priority sectors is energy storage. So can you tell me what it means to be a priority sector for New York Green Bank, how New York Green Bank decided on energy storage, and what strategies and financial products are you using to finance this type of technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, we're aligned with the New York State Climate Act and the Department of Public Service, and just broadly New York State. We're a division of NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And so when New York State comes out and says we have a target of reaching 6 gigawatts of storage by 2030, New York Green Bank needs to support that goal. And so that's a huge focus area for us to identify what's holding developers back from being able to actually deploy these assets in our state. One suite of challenges is just development itself, setbacks in terms of siting, permitting, interconnection queues, equipment procurement, everything that keeps developers up at night and unable to move their project forward. And typically, all the while, they are using primarily equity capital to fund the costs during this period, because there's tons of deal flow right now, and commercial banks are able to fly to quality and only provide more mainstream construction to term lending to the most well capitalized sponsors. And so we focused a lot of our time on how to provide financing prior to reaching notice to proceed, such as our interconnection deposit financing product, which has been extremely helpful to developers. We last year closed a $25 million facility and upsized to $50 million this year for a developer doing distributed energy storage in New York City, which is really exciting. We also offer other products that are a little bit more wonky, like incentive bridge lending, bridging to tax credit transfers, as well as term lending where there's merchant revenue stream exposure. So anything that's a little bit less than plain vanilla, a little bit more difficult to structure, more complicated, that's where we try to spend the majority of our time to help unlock development in energy storage as one example.
Wonderful. Jason, New Zealand also has this distributed energy focus, and they specifically, your team has created this really innovative solar financing program. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about it? Who were key partners in this, and what gaps this program was trying to fill?
Yeah, so a little bit like they do in New York, part of our mission and our mandate is to focus on areas where we can accelerate finance. I probably should have mentioned before, our overall mission is to accelerate decarbonization finance for New Zealand benefit. And we have 4 key mandate points, really. That benefit, we have to do commercial work. So unlike some of my peers, everything we have to do, we do has to be commercial, although that is interpreted in interesting ways sometimes. We always have to have the ability to scale private capital into what we do. We have some flexibility how that can be done as well. And by virtue of this work, we seek to build the overall market for decarbonization finance. So when we looked at distributed energy for New Zealand, again, parts of it are bankable today. So essentially, the most mature firms or senior debt on operating, say wind and solar farms is fully bankable. So we don't really go there. But since everything we do has to be commercial, we look at projects and companies and we think, well, what are the gaps in the market here? Like, what do we hear when we go out and engage with all of the operators and the other financiers? What are the real blocks and the things that are holding back quicker deployment of especially distributed solar, which has been our focus? And one of the things we identified from speaking to operators is that they really, in New Zealand especially, it's a pretty limited capital markets environment. So they really couldn't get long-term debt, and especially at fixed rates. So New Zealand banks, which are owned by Australian parents, really only will lend up to, say, 5 years or so, but that doesn't really help you when you have a longer term business model with longer term assets, et cetera, et cetera. So we thought to ourselves, well, we can take tenor risk, and we can provide fixed rates if we have a proper treasury function. So that was the operator side. On the investor side, we went out and spoke to a number of institutional investors, and they almost said the same thing, namely, we're always looking for dependable cash flows from either technologies, assets, or companies, et cetera, that we understand, that we get. Show us something that we get that has long-term dependable cash flows. We're interested. So we put together a program that essentially, via the creation of a special purpose vehicle that issued notes, worked with one particular operator initially, and now we do it with other operators in New Zealand, to bundle all of their existing, in this case, residential solar assets. So we created a securitization of about 10,000, now 15,000 actually, existing solar assets. And we essentially scrubbed the portfolio, established investment criteria and credit criteria, and then we issued notes to these, what turned out to be offshore investors, which is an interesting point unto itself, for what was an underlying asset securitization for distributed solar. We refinanced all that out, and then we set up a warehouse in which we would fund all of their new origination, and we've now turned that over a couple of times, and it's now grown to be about a $360 million program. So it's been a great success for us. And we're now duplicating that model in other parts of the economy. So we're doing the same for the grid right now. And we've got designs longer term to do it for some of the electric vehicle asset finance we've done, for example, in buses and passenger vehicles, and perhaps in other sectors as well. So that's the basics of the model, but there are other details as well.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's also been an award-winning model too. It's won a couple of Oceania awards and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we've won some. I forget the industry bodies that do these things, but from the banking and legal community in APAC has been pretty happy with it as well.
That's wonderful. I am going to touch on housing and building decarbonization and turn to DC Green Bank. DC Green Bank, as you were discussing, has this focus on building decarbonization, affordable multifamily housing, and this inclusive prosperity. Can you discuss why DC Green Bank has focused on these sectors, and how the bank couples these projects with other things like renewable energy? And then maybe also touch on the bank's focus on just transition and equity, and would also love to hear from our other panelists on how their banks may touch on this too.
Great, thanks, Isabel. So in DC, about 70% of emissions come from buildings. So that's a natural focus area for us. And until we fully decarbonize the built environment, we have a lot of work to do, not alone, but in tandem with so many public and private sector partners to get at more comprehensive strategies for reaching net zero and making deep energy, water conservation, healthy housing interventions, all, in as much as we can, in a package solution that's going to work, particularly for affordable housing. And you asked about clean energy. So the way we look at a project and an opportunity is to come in on larger multifamily green affordable housing developments. We want to be able to leverage our investment. I would love to be like New York and get to that scale. We are looking for durable, predictable funding to continue to make direct investments. We're at about 60 million right now and growing, but we want to be able to leverage 9-to-1 is our current ratio, every dollar of public funds in the district to crowd in at least 9 times their sources of private and public capital. So for a large affordable housing redevelopment, that means many different sources in a complicated capital stack that ultimately is going to achieve high performance building goals and do it in a way that can get projects over the finish line. And so, we'll come in with deeply subordinate debt as part of a permanent financing facility. In DC, we have this wonderful thing, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which has been a lifeline to projects that otherwise wouldn't have gotten built or refinanced. And we just hit a huge target of completing new affordable homes in the district a year ahead of schedule. And I think it was 36,000. And we're, continuing to accelerate that with green bank financing. Wherever we can pull in clean energy and do rooftop solar in DC, we have the benefit of a really robust community solar program and a solar for all program that predates the federal solar for all. So we're looking at scaling up that model and being able to pair incentives under a more traditional solar for all program with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to be able to deploy financing and low cost of capital to bring project developers who are either building owners of multifamily affordable housing projects or community-driven solar projects that haven't been able to get that seed capital to get up and running, to start to build a pipeline of projects that can do multiple things that were envisioned in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is make deep investments to improve the quality and health for the residents of affordable housing in the district, but also do it in a way that will slash energy bills by 50%, get us on the path to net zero, if not fully decarbonized, and then offset with clean energy, whether it's on-site or community solar. So it's putting all those puzzle pieces together and then figuring out how we do that in a way that's going to lead to that multiplier effect and bring in our capital bank partners and create the gap financing, fill the gap financing that makes these deals possible.
Great. Thank you. Aurea, I want to touch on something that you mentioned in your intro, which is that you are part of a bank that was transformed into, that had some transformative mission from the original development bank mandate into doing some more green financing. Would you mind chatting a little bit more on how the bank approached beginning to finance clean energy and green projects and how this work intersects with the bank's development goals?
Sure. I'm really proud to envision, and usually that's the scene. We keep talking about climate finance, and when we need to go to the last mile, the development banks can do that in the subnational level. For instance, I will talk about the solar panels that we finance, but if we consider our whole portfolio, it's not possible if you don't have funding from the international community. So we have partnerships and we have funding from the French Development Agency, we have from the European Investment Bank, we have from IDB, IFC, I could keep talking, but the idea is all that funding that's floating and needs to go to the last mile, we can make this happen. And I think this is kind of exposure to other financial institutions that are smaller and that has this intention at the former presentation told. Also, we know the risks in the local area, so it's different. And because of that, we kind of depend on this funding. So the international agenda, the SDGs, and the climate crisis, all these efforts, they kind of dictate what we're going to do, because that's kind of the idea, right? You have international partnerships that are saying, this is our mission right now, and this is the priority. And I like to say that we are kind of a proof that it works. Like, we are kind of being delivered by true emission that we believe, of course, but also we had several partners that are helping us to go there. So the bank is committed to the SDGs since 2018, I believe. And we have a framework that was built in partnership with IDB. And today, kind of 50% of our portfolio is directly going to some indicator for the SDGs, which is huge, like 50% of our entire portfolio. And also, we have a sustainability linked product that is kind of 20, I don't have this for sure, but kind of 20% of our portfolio, our outstanding portfolio. So it's, I would like to emphasize how this whole talking about climate finance can go to the delivery, can be real.
Thank you. I just want to prep the audience. We will be doing about a 15 to 20-minute Q&A. We'll have a couple more questions, but start thinking about the questions you have for our great panelists. I want to ask a question for both Kelsey and Jason, but welcome all the panelists to jump in. Y'all have focused on maybe some larger scale renewable energy finance, and as it's increasingly mainstreamed, it'd be great to know how green banks are continuing to fill gaps. Which technologies, since your banks have been around, may have graduated from the need for green banks, and what is the next frontier in decarbonization for your organization?
Sure, I can start. We were founded in 2013, and we have invested about $1 billion to deploy about 1 gigawatt of distributed community solar projects in New York State. We have the largest community solar market in the US. So we're not really needed there anymore. We'll consider investments in that space if there's a really significant contribution to disadvantaged communities that is otherwise preventing private market participants from providing financing, such as our recent transaction where we were able to get the developer to agree to a 65% minimum of subscribers within disadvantaged communities. So in those very specific instances, we can support community solar if there is a very specific need for our capital, but it's a high bar. Otherwise, we've moved on to our other focus areas, which are energy storage, which I talked about, clean transportation. There's lots of work to be done there. There's, a chicken and egg situation of, do we get the charging deployed first or wait for EV adoption to occur? I think it's important for New York State to support the rollout of EV charging infrastructure, and we're working on that currently with a couple of transactions. So really, we're just constantly testing the market. We call our friends at commercial banks and say, what kind of transactions are you turning away? What's giving you heartburn? And then we go and try to figure those out.
Yeah, I touched on one of the points in this area a little bit earlier, namely, even in the most mature companies and sectors, we always find opportunities. So if we take a step back, I mentioned an important part of our mission as we see it is to accelerate decarbonization finance. If you look at it in those terms, is finance generally flowing quickly enough for the climate problem? All of us know the answer is of course not. So there are actually really relatively few parts of the economy that we consider, fully bankable. Again, those most mature companies and senior debt in the biggest projects. Everything else, there's a role to accelerate. So I gave some examples in distributed energy, but I can give some more. So even in, say, electric vehicles, which are now a pretty mature technology, when we first started doing the assessment of the sector in New Zealand, we were somewhat astonished to learn that there was no bank in New Zealand that would finance electric vehicles only, i.e. there were companies that would finance fleets of vehicles that were mixed, but there was no bank in New Zealand that would finance electric vehicles only as an asset. So, and the reason for that, as I'm sure people in the room know, is because due to the lack of a secondary market, there was a huge amount of residual value risk in vehicles like that, both passenger vehicles and buses. So we thought to ourselves, well, this seems like an opportunity and a way for us to accelerate the market. And it's another way that we got involved in an area that was really a high risk for us. Namely, we set up our own subsidiary vehicle finance company to specifically finance passenger vehicles. And we've since done other transactions, as I mentioned, in electric buses. So even in mature technologies, there's always an area where it's just not happening, or it's not happening, as mentioned, quickly enough.
And I just jump in on the solar side in DC. There's an abundance of opportunities on this from solar suppliers and developers, and tremendous demand, which is enhanced by the SREC, the Solar Renewable Energy Credit Market in DC. However, there's a huge gap that we want to fill with our partners, and making sure that we're advancing equitable solar solutions and shared savings models, which you could look at the market and say it's good, it's scaled, but we're not serving our community well without advancing equity and bridging some of the enhancements under the Inflation Reduction Act, like the ITC bonus adder, like making sure that we can hammer home that those incentives are there for a reason, and making sure that the lowest cost of capital is reaching underserved communities. And I would say across the country, there are tremendous gaps to fill, and we're seeing it and trying to be part of that solution set in the district. But we'll continue to work in expanding to other areas, and net zero transportation and climate resilience, which is your next panel will address. I think those are, those are also key areas of our portfolio that we're excited to grow while we still double down on green development strategies and solar solutions.
Thank you. While we've touched on solar, BDMG also has had a really large focus on solar financing in their own portfolio. Would you mind speaking, Aurea, to that focus, maybe some of the on-the-ground realities in Brazil that encourage solar financing and the specific types of technologies that you're financing?
Sure. It was a good. I wouldn't say that's a coincidence, but the driest region of our state is also the one that has the higher insolation rate. Yeah, thank you. And because of that, we are seeing a kind of powerful economy transformation in that region, and not just because of the solar, but also because of some minerals for batteries, for example, lithium. So we have a whole region that didn't have any dynamic in the economy. Usually people went out of that region. It was a immigration site, and now they are starting to keep there and have other things to do except the original rural agriculture. So it's a thing that's feasible and that's perceptible to the eyes, and we are going to start to study the impacts academically also, because it's something that was really fast transforming. So we have seen this movement together with our disbursement from 2018, 2019 until now. And it's a whole industry that wasn't there before. And in that area, there was no other industry. So we are not replacing, we are occupying a lack. And this is the most noble motive for solar, but also it was not that simple in 2029 when we started, because several companies were SMS, and they didn't have the whole guarantees, the whole needs to assess the capital, and the presence of BDMG made the difference to make it happen. Especially because we developed a way to accept project finance for those SMS, even being smaller, and we were able to treat them as a project, because in our bank, usually smaller projects are just parameters, no, small numbers, like we treat as statistics. But for this kind of solar, we need to look as a project, and usually just above, I would say $10 million would deserve this kind of look. And now all the solar panels, solar projects receive this attention, and we made it work. Like, of course, we make some way to get scale, but it was a success for our size of the bank.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we can start entering to our Q&A. As I said, we'll do about 15 minutes for it. I think we have some microphones around that we can give out. But yeah, go ahead and raise your hand if you have questions. It looks like we have one over here.
Thanks. It's great to hear from the whole range of folks in the green banking world, and congratulations on a terrific event. My name is Jay Coe, and I actually sit on the advisory committee of the New York Green Bank and the board of NYSERDA, so I'm very partial to the New York Green Bank. We're very proud of what we've been able to accomplish. My question is to roll a grenade down the hallway, if you will, and say, what are you also thinking about, and how do you incorporate the resilience of your investments into the mitigation strategy you're doing? Like, you can measure it on the storage strategy we have here in New York State. It's obviously, intermittency of the actual energy generation. There's also now intermittency of demand, right? Like heat waves are going to crash the grid unless we have storage. There's a whole VPP strategy that Jigar Shah's been driving at the national level, and just wanting to understand. And we kind of think sometimes this artificial distinction between adaptation and mitigation, like the future we're going to live in is not a tale of two islands. You don't get to live in like adaptation island or mitigation island. You got to live in like one future, and it better be low carbon and resilient. So how in mitigation strategies are you guys beginning to incorporate resiliency systemically, either the risk of it or the benefit you can measure and then capture that benefit? Thanks.
I can take that. So yeah, we definitely think in terms of resiliency in the work that we do. I can focus on one hand really easily on the risk side. So as part of our due diligence, we do, for example, a physical climate change risk assessment for everything we do. But more interestingly is how we look at the opportunity side, obviously. And one of the interesting things we experienced in the past couple of years, folks here probably wouldn't know, but there was a large cyclone that hit the North Island of New Zealand a couple of years ago, and there was power outages and whatnot, like there normally would be. But interestingly, the clients of one of the solar operators that we finance, a company called Solar Zero, that installs batteries alongside their installations. Those clients, of course, weren't without power for a while. So that's something that got a lot of attention at the time. You made the press, the whole thing. So fortunately, again, we're already financing that, but we've started to push some of our other operator clients for more battery installation. There's, for example, in the New Zealand market, no utility scale independent storage. So we've been trying to structure opportunities like that. It's a little bit difficult in that jurisdiction due to the nature of the power markets, et cetera. But yeah, we focus on the resiliency benefits of quite a lot of our work, but particularly in battery storage.
It's a great question. I'll just jump in. I think, they're very much interwoven issues that we're seeing opportunities where we can, most recently under FEMA, the Storm Act, we're able to partner with our district colleagues. And we just, last week, they announced another $12 million for DC. So we're going to try and scale community resilience measures that can be embedded. Our approach was to do it with affordable housing so that you're building out additional interventions that support a community, but that are nested in a green affordable housing solution set. And a lot of those resilience measures otherwise wouldn't be funded. So there's a clear additionality there for why we would try and deploy more capital to support underserved communities at the site of affordable housing redevelopments. And so I think that can be a great model across the country for sort of bridging the resilience and infrastructure work with communities that need that, additional tree canopy, stormwater mitigation, and then are also looking at high performance building solutions and show how you can do both at the same time.
David.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, panelists. My name is David. I'm from Nigeria. We're currently working on establishing the first green bank in Nigeria, and we're trying to mobilize just private capital. I know most of you are probably public-private partnerships, so strictly public, but we're currently working on trying to raise private capital. So I think some of my questions will probably be in that regard. First is, following your establishment, probably by the government, based on what you've said, have you seen some significant uptick in probably requests for partnerships from private capital, institutional or impact investors towards your institutions willing to work with you? That's my first question. Is it okay if I ask more than one question?
Let's start with one, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I mean, yeah, that's at the heart of what we do, is trying to crowd in private market participation. So that can take many forms. You know, anytime we can, whenever we get a proposal, our first question is, why isn't somebody else lending into this project, and why are we needed? And first, the developer has to represent that, and then we also check it. So most of the people in the senior team at New York Green Bank have come from commercial and investment banks. And so we have lots of contacts who will call and say, are you sure you don't want to do this project? Because we want to make sure that we've exhausted all other resources before we use New York Green Bank resources to get the project completed. And if they say, okay, maybe we would do it, but we're a little apprehensive about these features, then we try and get them comfortable and see if we can do it together. Or maybe we do the first project and we bring them into the second one and show them how the first one performed. That's the strategy in terms of lenders. Then we also work with private market participants in terms of equity providers. We have good relationships with, you know, the different sponsors, financial sponsors in the market, and try to help them make additional investments. Like I mentioned the example earlier of the interconnection deposit financing. We did $25 million last year and $50 million this year as an increase. The equity check size also tripled during that time, as they were able to deploy more capital into projects at a faster clip. So those are two examples of how we try to engage the private market, open to other suggestions on how we could do that better. And I'm sure my panelists have other ideas as well.
I think we usually we start conversations with sovereign funds. This is a way that I think we can go, but there is, at least in Brazil, we have a problem in the taxation. So it is not worth it for us, for the sovereign funds to receive, because the tax that we pay when the fund goes out Brazil, it's too high. But because of that, we are trying, right now we are celebrating, I cannot say which partner, but we are celebrating a AB fund. So we have another agency that will make the money for some funds that are specific for SDGs and some family sources. They are going through other multilateral and then to our bank. So if you have this problem, would be a solution. If you don't, you can take the opportunity and go directly to them.
We have to think about scaling private capital and all of the work that we do. We do have flexibility around that. So, for example, there are opportunities in our portfolio that we've had co-investors in from the very beginning, and some in which we quite explicitly said, no, we're going to stand up a company or a project and bring in private capital after a certain point of maturity. But if you're seeking to set up a new institution, I'll reiterate some points that are no doubt well understood to you. One is focus on commerciality. So it's important for the opportunity, because we want economic sustainability just as we want environmental sustainability. But that, of course, is the only way you'll be able to scale private capital into your institution and those opportunities. And the other that I'm sure you've already thought of is to focus on simplicity, at least in the beginning. So as you've experienced, institutional investors will put money into stuff that they understand, right? So you might be able to do new, interesting, frontier type structures in the future, but at the beginning of an institution, just like the beginning of a fund or portfolio, they'll want to really understand your mandate. So I would focus on simplicity and then seek to, broaden that mandate in the future once you've got a little bit of track record.
Good advice. Thank you. We have a question over here from Ilmi.
Hi, Ilmi Granoff. I run with my brother Dean Granoff. They're a advisory climate technology group. We work with NRDC, but also one of our clients, Basis Climate, is a platform for clean energy tax credits. And I apologize to the international colleagues, but it was a question for the two US colleagues. Basis has really focused on the small end of the market and unlocking and commodifying the process of capturing the value of the now transferable clean energy tax credits. And they really want to be able to be a force to enable institutions that focus on those smaller deals to be able to exploit tax credit. Really interested in how your two institutions are looking currently at how to do that, knowing that this is a part of the market that was not able to take advantage of the investment tax credit or any of the other tax credits until good old IRA.
Sure. We should talk after this. Definitely. That's something that we're focused on. You know, we want to enable the smaller developers to access that market who previously did not have access to it. I'm working on a transaction right now for a geothermal project within multifamily housing that is incredibly complex and only, you know, $20 million at the most, and probably more like $5 million for the next 12 months. There's no way any other lender would pick up the phone to try and figure this out. They're not large enough to indemnify the tax credit. They need to get insurance. They need the insurer to say that this two-phased approach to deploying the geothermal is going to work and it's going to be saleable. And then we have to talk to these tax credit brokers who are going to tell us there will be a buyer, and the buyer is going to buy it somewhere in this price range. And when you deduct transaction costs, you should expect to get proceeds around this amount. And then we come up with an advance rate, something below that. And it's all first of a kind, sort of, in many different respects. But this is exactly where we want to spend our time, and think that it could unlock a lot of really meaningful work and impact. And so yeah, I would definitely like to talk to your client.
Yeah, and I'll be brief because I know we're running short on time, but absolutely, this is a game changer, and we're looking at, you know, how we can do more with smaller portfolios that otherwise were really left on the sidelines of this incredible solar market. And so we're, you know, we've seen an increase already in demand, but also the opportunity for monetizing the value of the ITC on direct pay and addressing transferability is something we're actively working on, and we see it as a really exciting way to crowd in additional projects, and also see opportunities for other players, the smaller solar developers too, to get active.
Thank you. Question up here.
Kelsey, I'm super excited to hear you mention geothermal. So love geothermal. If you guys have not seen what's happening in geothermal, please talk to Kelsey. She's an expert. So excited about that. The question that I have is private capital. You said you want to leverage private capital, and philanthropy is part of that stack. So I'd love to hear an example or two of these projects that would not be financed if you didn't have a philanthropic partner in doing that.
Any examples?
There's nothing in our portfolio that has philanthropic capital. And one interesting feature about the New Zealand market is there are no policy incentives pretty much of any kind. So unlike, there's no tax credits, there's no feed-in tariffs, there's none of that. There are some, to be fair, a few government granting programs that help out, but we have engaged with philanthropies in New Zealand, which are a little bit different in the US. They largely come out of the community trust structure. But we engage with them when they want to invest in some of the stuff because of the impact that we do. But they've come in on commercial terms. We've never had a philanthropic slice in our.
I could think of ways they could participate, like maybe taking first loss on residual value for these electric vehicles. That could be really interesting, but we don't have any in our portfolio either.
And so far, we've been partnering with philanthropy and exploring areas of growth, including as part of a clean water infrastructure working group that involves many different green banks. So we're hoping to scale that. But I could think of both credit enhancement, loan loss reserve. We have 87 million in pipeline that we can't fund directly right now. We're hoping that between CCIA and NCIF under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, we'll be able to get those qualified projects through the pipeline and into development. But regardless of the infusion of federal dollars, I think, you know, building a bridge to mission-related investing and direct philanthropic partners is an area that DC Green Bank's eager to explore. So for anyone in philanthropy, we have tons of great projects for you to partner with us on.
I think we'll take one more question from the audience.
Thank you.
And one of my questions, as a recurring theme I've heard throughout Climate Week, is that for climate capital, climate tech to succeed, you need three things. You need innovation, which we have a pipeline of that. We need finance, which you guys are bringing. We also need policy. Where does a green bank's role as a lender end? And has a policy lobbyist begin to ensure finance and innovation can flow? I'm specifically thinking about things like deploying the billions of dollars of DAF funds, budget reversals from cities that are undercutting everyone's initiative for an innovation in finance. Where does the roles for your respective organizations end as a lender and maybe begin as a policy advisor?
I'll start and others to jump in. Nicole, great to see you. I think the example in DC with the stormwater credit market is a good example of the virtuous cycle of good policy that needs to be improved, but is also one of the building blocks of creating a market where there's otherwise a gap in deploying green infrastructure through Green Compass and other amazing local partners to ensure that the policy, which is intended to address stormwater mitigation in a way that brings more capital into the system of investing in underserved communities, works, so that you can identify projects in Anacostia where the urban heat island effect is massive, and be able to take capital that would otherwise go to a penalty payment and instead create a credit system where you're investing in stormwater solutions that reach communities that are desperate for that kind of green infrastructure and community building opportunities. So I think we see our role as both interpreting the policy so that where other more conventional banks would say, we don't really understand the stormwater credit system, and that's not something that we think is bankable. That's kind of perfect for a green bank, because then we can take on more risk and create that bridge to creating a financing structure that goes hand in hand with a policy directive that's meant to address an otherwise unmet need in the marketplace. Where we deal with this issue, you were mentioning budgets, and every city is struggling with commercial office vacancies and just dealing with all sorts of changes in the dynamics that affect the general funds and public resources that should be flowing to great, public investments across the climate and community impact space. We've seen that in the district. And I think there's also, to the earlier point of where are there gaps to fill, there needs to be some smooth, helping to smooth out the market and ensure that there is access to capital from a variety of sources so that there can be more durability and predictability in the system. Because this boom and bust cycle that many of the green banks face when they're tied directly to a state or local public source of funding over a number of years creates real inefficiencies and blocks rapid deployment. So I'll leave it there and let my other colleagues jump in.
One really quick thing I could share is a successful program we ran this year is holding roundtables where we invited developers to come into the room on a topic, and then we invited policymakers within New York State to listen as we sort of prompted questions we knew we wanted them to hear, like they really need help getting equipment for battery storage. So we don't influence policy as the Green Bank, but we do try to bridge that gap in terms of communication, and it was a really nice brainstorming session.
Right.
No, I was thinking because, of course, the interest here is in moving the local politics, but in our side, what I see, it's usually when somebody, some market goes to our government and say, oh, we need funding for this or that, the answer is, oh, goes to the development bank. So we kind of do an education process in the other direction, like, oh, this is not for a commercial bank or for even a development or a green bank. This is something that needs grant for the government because it's in another stage, or it's not the case. But we kind of sometimes act helping the understanding in each situation, because here I see, and last year I saw that too, like you have so many funds flowing to be actually implementing projects, and we don't have the same reality. So usually what we try to do is to get some kind of blended finance, like we're trying to get the GCF fund, for instance, and make it work, because sometimes, most of times, the door on the government is closed. Like, we don't have funds for this. We cannot provide any. Just a context, BDMG in the past, when you were created, we received a public fund. And then we had funds that we managed for along the years, and we didn't even take those risks. It was pretty easy, right? It's money government. If I lost this in a bad transaction, it's not my problem. I keep working. And of course, this was not a very efficiency. This changed like 20, 15 years ago, and you have to create the means to survive as an institution. And because of that, we have this perception of what needs grant and what doesn't. And we try to influence the government in this situation.
Yeah, we definitely do no lobbying. Most important because it's important to us to stay apolitical. And in addition, for the point that Arya made about wanting to maintain some distance and independence as part of our commercial mandate, we have engaged with certain government entities, primarily, to be honest, because they like to learn, like, hey, what's going on in the market? Because we have commercial teams that are at the coalface, if you will, on market dynamics that they like to hear. But the most important point, a little bit, like they do in New York, is we focus on what we call, again, our market demonstration and leadership. So we publish case studies, we do public speaking, and we always talk about these are the market gaps that we're filling, or this is the area in certain structure, certain sectors that we're accelerating, et cetera, et cetera. So people understand, policymakers included, our work and the landscape that we're seeking to address.
Thank you. And thank you for those questions. Before we close out and go to our next panel, I just want to ask one last question, about one sentence answer. What are you excited about in the next 12 months? And we can go down the line. Let's start with Jason now.
Wow. Yeah, I'm so New Zealand focused. Do you mean international or in my market?
Either. Let's say in your market.
Excited to potentially start to be able to support offshore looking Kiwi companies. That's something that we can't do today. So we focus on domestic benefit, but because of the nature of a small economy, a lot of the most successful companies actually, of course, have export growth plans, both for their own economics and ultimate environmental benefit. And those are companies that we cannot support today. And we're seeking to work with our board and our shareholders to say, hey, we should be able to support great New Zealand companies that happen to have an export growth plan. We think it makes sense. So we'd like to do that.
Great. Kelsey?
Energy storage, clean transportation, and tax credit transferability.
Nice.
Well, next year, it will be the next COP in Brazil. So I hope I can see a lot of some companies here. And this is putting a good pressure in us to developing solutions and news to be taught and to be spread the next year, not just in the bank, but in all the kind of governments, institutions over there. So let's see.
I'm most excited about the partnership opportunities. I mean, this is a historic moment for us, and we don't have enough time to scale the solutions on our own. So let's figure out how to deploy, and scale under the IRA.
Thank you all. It was a great panel, and we'll have our second panel come up.
Hey everyone, just take a breath of fresh air. It's a little hot in here, so stretch, get something to drink. We have drinks after this next panel, so I want you guys to make sure I didn't waste the money on the wine. So please stick around for the next panel.
How are you? I'm Jake. We've made some investments in Brazil recently in around adaptation technologies, like in the healthcare sector and agriculture. So would love to chat about that. I'm excited for COP30 next year.
When you were talking, were you using this or this? Okay.
Yeah. Start with this. I think that's Trisha's. Or no, that's Laura's. Wait, said about occurrence. Huh? Hi, everyone. We're about to start our second panel. If you wouldn't mind taking your seats again. At the top, it's on.
Hi. Hello? I am?
Oh, wait. Yeah, I think it's on.
Hello. Yeah. Hi, everyone. We are going to get started talking about adaptation and resilience. Laura, how are you? Good to see you. So beautiful. Thank you. I love you. Hello, everyone. We have one last panel. Hi, Rick.
Explain to me what's bioeconomy.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Cool. Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. I am happy to introduce, I'm just going to get our next panel. So this panel is focusing on adaptation and resiliency finance, and we're looking at barriers, solutions, and equitable implementation. We have a great list of panelists today. Is this not working?
It's running out of battery. Oh, here you go.
Is that better? Oh, now you can hear me. I'm Adele Thomas. I am Senior Director of Adaptation at NRDC, and I'm very happy to be moderating this panel. And I will just briefly introduce our distinguished panelists for today. We have Rick Noguera, who is a Senior Advisor at Pollination, where he advises major philanthropies, governments, and multilateral development banks on designing and implementing climate finance solutions. Rick is also a board member of the DC Green Bank and a member of the Independent Technical Advisory Panel at the Green Climate Fund. Next, we have John McGinley. John is managing partner of Mekong Strategic Capital. He has also led the establishment of the Cambodia Climate Finance Facility. He is a former banker and a current expert in sustainable finance. Next, we have Lee Welton. Lee is Director of Environmental Infrastructure at Connecticut Green Bank, where she leads the bank's expansion beyond clean energy into climate resilience. She oversees the design and implementation of new programs to leverage private capital, including a core goal of increased investment in vulnerable communities. And finally, we have Laura Mondragon. Laura is Director of Climate Resilience at Montgomery County Green Bank, where she has led the creation of the bank's climate resilience strategy. Her work emphasizes partnership creation, innovative finance, and a just and equitable transition. So thank you all for being here. We're going to get started with a question to each of you to just tell us a bit about your financial institution, how it is capitalized, and how your organization's mission relates to adaptation and resilience. And we'll start here with you, Laura.
Thank you very much. Is it on?
Gotcha.
There you go. Thank you, Lee. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, Montgomery County Green Bank is the first county-based green bank created in the US. We are a public-private partnership, and our mission is to support the county in meeting climate goals. We were created back in 2015, and back then we didn't have any mandate to engage on any type of resilience or adaptation activities. And that thankfully changed in 2023 when they opened the scope of work for the Green Bank. And they brought me on board to develop this strategy on climate resilience. Yeah.
All right, it's like 4:30 Wednesday of Climate Week. How we all doing? We'll do our best, right? So Lee Welton, Director of Environmental Infrastructure Programs at the Connecticut Green Bank, which I think we can now lay claim because someone else said we could do the very first green bank. Our mission is to confront climate change by increasing and accelerating investment into Connecticut's green economy to create more resilient, healthier, and equitable communities. We were established by the Connecticut General Assembly in 2011 as the nation's first level green bank, actually stemming from, I want to call it a failed, I hope it's not an incorrect term, failed attempt to launch a national green bank. We are a quasi-public state agency, which kind of, I think, is a somewhat unique role within the green bank universe, and really have used that status to accelerate the deployment of clean energy and now environmental infrastructure using the green bank model you're all well familiar with. And just in terms of how we're capitalized, we have two primary sources. One is a system benefit charge on every Connecticut electric ratepayer bill, about $7 to $10 per family per year for a total of $25 million. And two, we receive 23% of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative allowance proceeds, are about $5 million a year, so 30 total, which we try to turn into 5 to 10x leverage through our deployments. Since inception, we've mobilized $3 billion into Connecticut's green economy. That has helped to support over 27,000 green jobs and reduce the energy cost burden of over 70,000 families, businesses, and nonprofits. But why am I here talking about environmental infrastructure? Just quickly, I'll say that in 2021, at our 10-year anniversary, Governor Ned Lamont led a bipartisan effort to expand our authority from clean energy now into environmental infrastructure, which is inclusive of an overarching focus on climate adaptation and resilience, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and greenhouse gas mitigation. So on the mitigation versus adaptation, for us, it's the rules of improv, yes and, right? And so in terms of how environmental infrastructure is capitalized, we can get into this if it's of interest. We actually cannot use, we have statutory limitations on our ability to touch the system benefit charge and the RGGI proceeds. So we're looking into other ways that we can capitalize environmental infrastructure through interest and earnings off balance sheet and other deployments to date. So I'll stop there.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here. My name's John McGillian, Managing Partner of Mekong Strategic Partners. We are Cambodia firm. We started in Cambodia over 10 years ago, and we have offices in Bangkok and Vietnam and Phnom Penh, obviously. So we are an investment advisory firm, and we specialize in the finance sector and climate. We launched and started something called the Cambodia Climate Finance Facility, and I guess its origin was we were asked by the Cambodian government if we could examine what would be the ultimate structure that would allow Cambodia to attract and source and disperse all the climate finance that was being spoken of around the world post-Paris, and these large commitments and these large numbers which were being bandied around. Many developing countries in Southeast Asia, were very unsure how to access that funding, particularly when looking at the GCF model. So we were asked to examine and explore what would be the optimal structure that would allow Cambodia to access that funding and disperse it into the economy and help it meet some of its climate policies that the government had set. So we did that. It was quite a long journey. We were involved becoming a GCF delivery partner where we accessed readiness funds, and we spent time studying and analyzing green banks in developing countries to try to work out what was appropriate for a country like Cambodia. So we did that, and then we went through this whole process of looking and finding out, was it a new green bank starting from scratch, or was it working on was there a fund, offshore, onshore, all the different mechanics. And we ended up designing a facility which is ring-fenced within a local development bank called Agricultural Rural Development Bank, which is a state-owned policy bank. And we preferred the model of partnering with a policy bank over a commercial bank. Yeah, and so that was the model. So we've eventually found an accredited entity, for those who are familiar with GCF, and we partnered with the Korean Development Bank, who agreed to sort of go on this journey with us, and we ultimately wrote the proposal ourselves and did a lot of the work, and basically got the $100 million investment approved by GCF in the most recent board meeting in March, not the most recent probably. So that was great. So that was the capitalization. That is 50 million from GCF, 15 million from the Cambodian government, which was important. And well, it's actually going from and 35 from the Asian Development Bank, but they've increased their commitment now to 85. So the total capital will be 150. So it's a debt facility basically, and we help Development Bank understand climate, measure climate, and work on the pipeline and managing the pipeline. So it's a new model, I guess. It's what they're saying is kind of the first green bank in Asia. It's been quite a journey working with GCF and partners, but we're happy about it and we're successful that we got there in the end. But no, so now we're very pleased and excited that there's a large pipeline of demand, and there's a lot of market failures in the finance system in countries like Cambodia, where the local banks are very conservative and only will lend out to 3 years. So the tenor's too short. So we have developed structures and partnerships with local banks and to unlock their balance sheets as well. So we're pretty confident that we'll be able to ramp up the facility over the next 3 to 5 years and hopefully declare it a success. But that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Rick Noguera, but before I kind of go on from there, I'll just note whether or not Connecticut or UK came first, because maybe UK has an argument. UK Green Bank doesn't exist anymore, right? So I think Yeah, so the oldest surviving one would be the correct and unimpeachable title for Connecticut. So my name is Rick Noguera, and when they asked, would you want to be on this panel, I said, sure, I'm happy to talk as a board member of the DC Green Bank. And they said, well, Tricia Miller is going to be here. I'm like, well, in that case, you don't need me. You have our highly, highly competent CEO. But if it's of interest to you, the GCF has recently been funding quite a few green banks. It's part of its strategy to support local financial institutions, support what they call direct access entities. We just approved this amazing bank in Cambodia. And I typically I'm on the investment committee for the GCF, and I typically look after anything that's a green bank. I tend to be the lead reviewer. And he said, well, we already have Kavita and John coming. I said, well, in that case, you really don't need me. So what am I going to do? So he said, do you have another hat on? I said, I do. I have many hats. So I'm here as a senior advisor to Pollination. So maybe I'll start describing who Pollination is. So Pollination is a specialist climate change advisory firm, but also an asset manager. So they're typically focused on anything that can generate mitigation outcomes, including carbon markets on the asset management side, and also nature. And then on the advisory side, an area where they've gotten deeply engaged in, including myself, and this is where I get pulled in as an advisor to them, is on green banks. So we've typically, not too differently than Mekong, I have been pulled in mostly with African countries, with one European country, and also with a contributor government who's looking at opportunities to support green banks and helping assess whether there is an opportunity there, and then helping think through what is the right structure for that market in particular, finding the right horse or the right horses for the right courses sort of situation. So that's a big part of what we do, and we're actively working now with several governments thinking through these issues. And so as we go forward and answer questions, I'll typically have that frame in mind, which is more with that hat on, which is what I'm seeing in the developing countries, in our client base, who are hearing that there's money out there to support green banks. They're also seeing the necessity of creating institutions in their own markets that are mission driven along climate lines to help them meet their NDC targets, and what some of those challenges are and how we're involved in that.
Great. Thanks all of you for that introduction to your institutions. And what we'd like to do now is to dig a bit deeper into the adaptation and resilience focus of your institutions. So going down the line again, could you please tell us a bit more about your institution's strategy for adaptation and resilience? What are you focusing on? How is this strategy determined by things like the unique climate hazards that your jurisdiction may be facing? And we'll start with you again, Laura.
Great, thank you. Well, our institutional strategy for climate resilience and adaptation has three basic pillars. So as mentioned, the Green Bank has a very strong clean energy portfolio. So what we're trying to do with our first pillar is really identify the opportunities within our clean energy portfolio where resilience and adaptation can be integrated, not only to specific transactions, but to programs that we currently have on our clean energy side of the bank. So that's one of our pillars, the first one, I would say, and they all run in parallel. The second pillar is we've allocated resources with the idea and identifying the need of flowing capital towards climate resilience and adaptation to our communities. So basically through partnerships, which has been our main, let's say, goal since the strategy began implementation, is really supporting initiatives and let's say climate resilience and adaptation champions out in our communities that were already flowing capital towards climate resilience and adaptation without even tagging that as climate resilience and adaptation. So the idea of this second pillar is really get out there. I like to call it get inside of the kitchen of the projects, get our hands dirty and get very close to communities and really understand their needs. How are they facing climate hazards and how are they really prepared for the future? We are working, we work very close to with our county. So we are lucky to have a climate hazard mitigation assessment for our county. So we have already identified the hazards that we're currently facing, and that will get worse in future climate scenarios. That's the one is flood, is extreme heat and extreme weather events. So that's our second pillar, where we really need to identify needs, as mentioned, but also define the Green Bank's role in helping communities and the county meeting those needs. Identifying key players. We hear a lot that we need to support our disadvantaged communities, but we don't know who are the players that need to be, let's say, responsible to provide conditions to these communities to face climate hazards. That's our second pillar. And the third is the long-term strategy. So what are the financial mechanisms and instruments, but making sure that this pillar, it's being fed by the second one, and it's making communities part of structuring the solutions, the long-term solutions, and also working hand in hand with the county in terms of policy and regulation that will give us the long-term financing mechanisms, and making sure that all of those solutions are arriving to the most disadvantaged communities in Montgomery County. That was a question. The strategy. Yeah, I'll stop there.
All right, so you think about Connecticut, certainly some coastal issues in terms of resilience, but also we know a lot of the science and data is not looking great. So Connecticut has a forecast 20-inch sea level rise by 2050. And if we think that's something that's only going to affect coastal communities, there's a new survey from our 169 municipalities across the state that shows 70% are already facing not just coastal, but also riverine flooding issues. There's also a new study out from the US Chamber of Commerce in concert with Allstate showing that every $1 of resilience investment nets about $13 of cost savings, not just from the damages, but also the avoidance of the disrupted economic activity. Why is that important? Connecticut is currently awaiting a potential disaster declaration from August 18th, just a few short weeks ago, which had incredibly disastrous flood impacts for 3 counties and is already on track to be the costliest storm since Sandy, which I think it's north of $200 million of impacts, just mostly in terms of public infrastructure. So the imperative is there. In terms of how we, the Green Bank, are really interpreting that imperative, I have to laugh because Laura and I were on a call in July, and turns out we have very similar 3 strategy pillars for how we're thinking about climate adaptation and resilience. So I'll parrot a couple of these. One, really think about the bench strength of Green Bank offerings. So thinking about Connecticut's existing programs and how we can expand those to include aspects of resilience so that we can get started now, today, within what is already commercially viable and what is already backed by the capacity and staffing of the Green Bank and our partners to pursue bespoke opportunities. So, Jason Patrick on the last panel was talking a lot about how New Zealand is thinking about what is commercially viable. We're thinking about that in terms of where is the market calling us in for near-term project finance opportunities. We just got board approval this summer for expansion of our capital solutions, open rolling RFP, which is a flexible open program for proposals for project finance activities. And then 3, thinking longer term, where do we want to direct the market? What is our role as a Green Bank in helping to animate markets for environmental infrastructure? And that speaks a little bit to Nicole's question to the last panel too, on a policy role for the Green Bank. So we are very active in the policy process in Connecticut. Last legislative session, we helped to create some strategies within the governor's resilience bill that would have, apparently it takes 3 sessions to get anything passed in Connecticut. So I'm trying to be patient. would have created something called a resiliency improvement district, which is effectively TIF financing, tax increment financing for nature-based solutions and other green infrastructure and resilience measures. So those are a couple of the ways that we're thinking about this as a green bank.
Hi. Okay. So for smaller, I guess, developing countries in Southeast Asia, resilience and adaptation is the priority. If you look at the sort of the global output or their carbon footprint, it's quite minuscule. So whilst there is great mitigation projects underway and energy transition projects, which is important, the real imperative priority is adaptation and resilience. Cambodia is in the top 10 of the countries most vulnerable to climate change impacts for multiple reasons. So the focus on adaptation and resilience is a key component of what we're trying to do and embedding that as a priority. It aligns with what the government's asked us to do and also the capital providers. So it's a priority, and it's also a challenge in terms of, obviously, we have to divide it through what is commercially viable and what is not. So when we look at the landscape, I mean, of what boosts resilience and adaptive capabilities, there are those that are private sector based, which can generate a commercial return, which can repay a loan, and there are those that can't. So, and there's more government projects, as you know. So we are obviously just focused on identifying those which are commercial. So the way we're looking at it is just through prioritization of resources and people, and making sure we're at the pipeline that gets developed. There's a priority for adaptation and resilient projects. I'll give you a few examples. So what's important in Cambodia, the greatest climate change impact risk for people is flooding. So villages, and this is the same for Vietnam, Thailand, Laos, these villages will flood and they will not have access to clean water. So we are working with developers and project developers around financing piped water rural extensions. So when periods of flooding, households can still access clean water, which is important for multiple reasons, obviously. But it also has an impact of reducing deforestation, because a lot of these communities burn wood from the forest to boil water to create clean water during these periods. So the extension of clean piped water is really important. So that's a priority, because obviously there's going to be more flooding as the climate change impacts take greater hold in Cambodia. Other areas would be things like fisheries. So we see a little bit like in coastal communities, there's saltwater incursion into the aquifer. So the rice areas that grow down around the coastal areas are no longer productive for rice. So they're looking at ways you can transfer those into like fisheries or shrimp. So providing funding for businesses and entrepreneurs to pivot away from rice farming, which is no longer viable in coastal areas, is important. And so in talking about financing and structures, one way we'd look at it is, so fish farming, inland fisheries around there's lakes in Cambodia and Tonle Sap. So we would fund microfinance to provide loans and under generous terms, let's say, to entrepreneurs to develop fish farming, because there's this collapse in fish stocks due to the hydro dams and whatnot. So there's a need to develop alternative sources of protein. So we would fund fisheries companies and smallholders through microfinance by providing a sort of one loan to them and develop it through to the micro. So there's a variety of pipeline and projects, but it is definitely a priority for our institution that we, not necessarily solar is great and rooftop solar is great, but there are greater needs and more important demands for the communities in these countries. So we're really focused on serving those people through these kind of resilient projects. And there's not many of them. They're hard to find. And the question before was around philanthropy, and like we use a lot of technical assistance and donor capital to help underwrite some of these costs that these businesses need to qualify for loans. So that's important in these kind of countries. But no, so that's how we look at the topic. So it's a key priority.
Sure. Thank you. Earlier, those who were listening to Kavita, she talked about the Barbados Blue Green Bank. Well, what we're seeing from an advisory practice is after the announcement of that bank, I don't know why that one just triggered so much attention. I think a whole bunch of countries kind of looked around and said, well, if a small island state with very small population can do this, and it's both focused on resiliency and mitigation, as well as thinking about their coastal areas, then maybe this is for us too, right? So all of a sudden, what we started to see is many, many countries kind of raising their hands and saying, yeah, we want some of that too. But when we start talking to them, thinking about what a strategy is and what some of the issues are, the first issue that we run into is they know they have a need for adaptation measures and to make their societies much more resilient because they're already feeling the impacts of climate day to day. In many countries, in many developing countries, the amount of climate change that's already happened, that's already baked in, they're at the brunt of it. They're feeling the brunt of it, so they know it's there, but they often lack some of the data that you have in Connecticut and elsewhere to be able to demonstrate that they know what they felt before, but that going forward, the expected impacts in a particular region are going to be X, so we know this intervention is going to be the right intervention. And so almost the first part of strategy is to look at what their plans are and to make sure that we can find ways to fund the data and to make sure that they are not going to bring forward to the world something that they can't actually defend from a climate rationale standpoint. And that happens more often than you think, because they also have lots of other development needs. And if they feel the climate train is moving, let's take this big, important development need and bring it forward as a climate project. I'll give you an example. We looked at one country where one part of the country was facing severe droughts. Their water systems were stressed. The droughts were no longer in line with historic patterns. It was clearly climate driven. So their logic was, what we need to do is get a financing facility to help kind of rehab all our water systems across the country. But the issue is it's a big country. The other side of the country, where the vast majority of troubled assets were from a water standpoint, actually, when you look at the climate models, it's going to get wetter. Right? Their problem wasn't droughts. Their problem was a different problem, or their problem wasn't particularly climate related. It was non-revenue water. It was the fact there hadn't been any investments in 25 years in that system, right? So I think that's like one part of our strategy is to avoid going down the wrong path and not actually bringing forward a resiliency and adaptation program that is defended by the science. And sadly, that sometimes means it takes more time, and we don't have as much time as we once had, but that is a big piece. Now, the areas where we're seeing a lot of activity, where countries are excited to do things, is on the water side. So talk about water. And we always say the other big piece of strategy is, what are the economic sectors that are most important for your country generally, take away climate, even if there may be other sectors that may be more climate impact, you're sometimes better off starting with your core sectors. So if it's a particular agricultural product, let's do that. If tourism is a big part of your economy, let's look at that. And part of the reason is those tend to be the sectors that have most data, that maybe already are banked, and there's a community of financial institutions that know the underlying business a little bit. And third, even though they may be the second or third sector that's facing, in terms of where the front line of climate is in that country, the economic importance to the rest of the economy, to the rest of the country is so important that that's where you're going to want to focus. So that's been a big part of what we've kind of helped folks think about, is what are those sectors? And they tend to always be water, agriculture, tourism, and more we're starting to see like general infrastructure looking forward, right? So this is infrastructure that's already been on the books, that they're planning looking forward. How can you think about it from a climate impact standpoint, from an adaptation standpoint, and in the front end, build in resiliency measures that hopefully will pay out over time. So it may be slightly more costly in the beginning, but with the savings you're going to see over time, both from insurance as well as from just hopefully being able to better withstand climate impacts, that should be a good investment. That is a role that green banks could play, but often they're not there. And that's part of the reason I think they are an important institution for developing countries.
Thank you all for all of that, shedding some light. Moving into some individual questions. We've heard a lot about water and flooding. Laura, your bank actually recently partnered with the city of Rockville to enhance the city's flood mitigation assistance program. Can you tell us a bit more about what this partnership entails, how it came about, and how that work is going to reach communities that are vulnerable to climate change?
Sure, thank you. So this partnership with the city of Rockville is part of what we call the market exploration, which is our pillar 2. And it's, so we, through that pillar, we're trying to really build on initiatives that were already happening. So the city of Rockville is a municipality that is extremely a climate champion. They have their own climate action plan, and they have in place a flood mitigation assistance program for their residents. This program is the only program in the county, let's say, supporting residents on flood mitigation. However, it is a structure as a rebate program, so it's not reaching vulnerable, disadvantaged communities. So what we did is through a partnership with the Green Bank, we came to the program to, let's say, inject resources, financing resources, so we can unlock benefits to disadvantaged communities in the city of Rockville. What's the idea of this, let's say, market exploration pilot is understand community needs. How are disadvantaged communities in Rockville facing flood? And identifying key players in terms of how are we moving forward, making sure that we are structuring mechanisms that are supporting these disadvantaged communities in facing this climate hazard. So this is one of 5 market exploration initiatives that we have. There are some others in extreme heat exposure, and others on incentivizing nature-based solutions and green stormwater infrastructure. But this one has already started implementation. We have also, through this partnership, we're working with the Chesapeake Bay Trust. They are basically kind of leading the way on community engagement efforts and helping us as the Green Bank build a new network on water management experts. The Green Bank we have a very strong network on clean energy. We are starting to build our network on resilience and adaptation. So this is also, this partnership has also been, and on all of the market exploration initiatives have been key for us to really grow this network and get ourselves out there to these communities and start building trust, so we can support them in the long term with real solutions that really are meeting their needs.
Thank you for that. In adaptation and resilience, we are hearing all about the importance of nature-based solution and ecosystem-based adaptation. So Lee, I know you have a background in conservation finance and expertise in nature-based solutions. Can you tell us a bit more about how CGB is tackling this?
A lot of aspiration for now. You know, it's funny, listening to Laura talk, I was taken back to a pilot project in Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, which is on the coast of Maryland on the Chesapeake Bay, and a costly attempt to plant 40,000 plug grass specimens to try and help retain enough sediment to raise the actual shore enough to the point where the shoreline could survive sea level rise. The ability of our natural ecosystems to do things that we cannot afford to do otherwise is really important. How we finance that is still something that I think a lot of people in this room are curious about. Rick, I'm going to pick on you. And a coffee date a year ago where you admitted to, I think you admitted to being, I don't want to put words in your mouth, afraid of nature-based solutions. Not afraid.
I didn't say afraid, probably more negative.
Yeah. So I'll, you know, in the way the Green Bank is...
Just being a devil's advocate, by the way.
I mean, to be fair, we'll debate this after for drinks, for sure. But it is complicated. A lot of this is pre-commercial. Nature doesn't pay for itself. And a lot of what we're talking about, unlike some of the benefits of energy markets, you know, we're talking about a lot of market externalities still. And so when we think about this from the Green Bank perspective and our strategy execution, we started by expanding our residential home improvement product, our Smart E loan, and it's got a whole bunch of resilience measures. It is 2 that I would consider nature-based. One is impervious to pervious surface conversion, tip of the hat to the DC program for some inspiration on the technical details there, and also on tree planting or removal of dead and hazardous trees, and for replacement of native and shade tree species, I should say. And, you know, there's so much that we still need to figure out about this, including adoption, market adoption, consumer adoption, actually getting the tool out there. We have 2 products. The first was elevation of an HVAC system. So not exactly what gets us out of bed for nature-based solutions, but we did just recently have the first, that is impervious to pervious surface conversion, using the natural process of infiltration to manage storm water. So, you know, we've got a lot of way to go. We're also, I just have to mention, because I think that the making these benefits and making these financing products and programs accessible to vulnerable communities is of tantamount importance. We're trying to develop some market proof points with a vulnerable community through a partnership with a civic organization in Hartford, our hometown, on how to think about whether through a linked deposit program or other structuring to bring the interest rate down and try and prove not only that residential home improvement for resilience works, but also potentially what we hope to prove is that you might actually be able to pay for it from energy cost savings if you bundle energy and resilience measures. And then on our project finance capacity, I think this is really the key to some near-term nature-based solutions for us, whether it's restoration of a living shoreline or many other potential nature-based solutions, really looking for partners there. So I'll stop, but plenty more to say.
Thanks. Moving on to you, John. You talked about the importance of adaptation and resiliency in the developing world context. The Cambodia Climate Finance Facility is the first climate-focused national investment vehicle in Asia. Do you see this model being replicated in other Southeast Asian states, or do you think it's just uniquely situated for Cambodia?
So, yeah, I do. I feel it's replicable. I think we hope it's replicable. We are certainly trying to replicate it. So we think it's quite a simple product, right? I mean, for the way we think about this green bank, it's primarily just debt. We're not doing it's not a sophisticated market in these markets where we're operating in. And so just quickly on our mission, our goal is really not just to be one bank lending to one solar project or an adaptation project. Where we measure our success is around bringing in local banks. So we work very closely with particularly local banks and not foreign banks, because local banks tend to have a greater risk appetite for adaptation projects. Projects that have greater risk local banks tend to finance them. But the problem with local banks is they tend not to meet the standards of international lenders like GCF. So there's a huge gap in terms of them accessing finance. But these are the ones who will actually do the good work on the ground, right? The cities, all the ANZs or whatnot won't, for multiple reasons. So we have a key mission to train local banks and work with local banks. And we use the capital to provide incentives to local banks to get them involved. And that's what we consider like success that we can crowd in and train. And we do a lot of work with USAID and around their support to kind of get banks up to speed across Southeast Asia. So that's our plan. So one of the incentive models we talk with the governments are around, they have these NDC commitments in huge numbers, and everybody's always talking about, the billions and the trillions. So in our mind, like the huge amounts of capital actually exist already, but they sit on the balance sheets of local banks, which mostly are, as I said before, kind of off limits for lending from IFC or DFC, whoever. But so our mission is to try to unlock that capital. So as we would talk to the governments of Cambodia, let's say, or Vietnam, let's say Vietnam. So to reach the financing of their NDCs, and we're not saying private banks should finance the NDCs, but it's basically 10% of system assets. So this is where we work with governments around, it gets your point around expansion. Like if they were to set targets and 10% of local banks must have their qualified green projects, you could quite easily have enough capital to meet the volume of funding that's needed to meet their NDCs. So the notion that the money's all going to come from USAID or GCF is false. It needs to come from local bank balance sheets and get them involved in this climate financing. So that's our vision, right, and our model of doing that. So where we've mapped all this, like Indonesia's like 17%, Philippines 13%, Cambodia of assets for NDCs, right? So just to prove the point to the countries. So our model is with GCF, so when we need the governments on side. So we've been approached from the governments of Vietnam, East Timor, Papua New Guinea and Fiji, and asked if they could have a CCFF equivalent there. So we think it's a replicable model, but and it took us many years to get the Cambodian one off the ground, learning the GCF processes and kind of picking that lock to get that capital was a lot of work. But I think now we've learned what we need to do. We're hoping that next will be Vietnam and Philippines and maybe East Timor. Hopefully it's interesting. So so the answer, the long-winded answer is yes, it's replicable.
Great, thank you. Before I open it up for some brief questions from you in the audience, one last question for you, Rick. We've been talking about private finance, and in adaptation, private finance is seen as particularly challenging. So Pollination closely coordinates with private finance. What is the latest thinking on how private finance approaches adaptation finance, and what deals is private finance not yet interested in financing? Yeah. And don't say nature-based solutions.
There's some interest in nature-based solutions if you have carbon credits or some other revenue, because the main problem, and this is the issue you run into adaptation generally as well as nature, is for a lot of the private sector, they don't quite understand where the revenues are going to come from. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not there in some cases, but it isn't an area where there's like a deep understanding or comfort level. And then when they look at projects, what you often hear is, well, I'm told they're revenues, but when I look at it, the revenues are quite uncertain. They're somewhere out in the future, and they come from savings, right? Not like no one's buying something or paying for a service. Again, that's a difficult thing for people to get their heads around. Or sometimes what they look at, the revenues are these, eyebrow-raising J-curves. Like, yeah, nothing's going to happen for, 10 years. But after I'm already gone, my fees collected, whatever, then, whoo, you're in the money. Like, then that nature's going to kick in and it's going to be pounding, and then you're in it. So that is an issue, right? So that is an issue. However, we do know that resilience to climate is important, and it is something that has to get done. And as John said, it's not going to be simply funded by the GCFs of the world or USAs of the world. You got to find a model that makes sense for others. So I think where green banks can be successful and have been successful, one is it actually doing these deals, because nobody else is doing them. And then being very transparent about it and kind of being open kimono about how you do it, what your structures are, what your expected returns are, talking about them, showing this, because then you start educating the market and you start educating the private sector of what these things can look like. And then the second part is thinking about where in these transactions you sit, so that you can help de-risk themselves. So this is stuff that's familiar to everyone, but it is important to figure out where the right place is in some of these adaptation deals. And I'll give you two examples. Talk about agriculture. Like, one of the big issues, agriculture is a well-banked sector in a lot of countries, but usually the financing you can get is for 1 year, 1 season, right? So it's for seeds, it's for maybe some immediate equipment, fertilizer, and so on. But if you need to put in interventions that are going to take you several years to make your particular sector of agriculture more resilient, and you're only going to see the benefits of that 6-7 years later, that's the role where you can see public money playing, taking the long piece of it, still allow, and finding a role for more commercial money to come in alongside that. You see that actually in your project as part of what, if I recall, you guys are looking to do in Cambodia. CABE, which is a Central American Development Bank, they're doing a program just like that for agriculture, where they're working through local banks. They've identified several banks in each of their 7 or 8 countries. They're providing them with some concessional money, and they're saying, but that money can only be lent against adaptation outcomes in agriculture. And by the way, here's some TA, that's the other area that's important, to help figure out what that is, who's going to measure that, and so on. So it's not easy. That's the big problem. It really isn't an easy area. There are some low-hanging fruits, as I mentioned, earlier. If you start with the sectors that already are banked, that already have a track record, where maybe government's already involved, so you're getting the government's balance sheet for like big infra, and just making sure that's built in a way that's resilient and that those costs are funded up front. We do a little bit of that at DC Green Bank with on the real estate side, where maybe sometimes there's maybe on a large project just need a little bit to help get them to a more ambitious target around energy efficiency or solar, so long as we're willing to come in and fund that and be junior to everybody else, so we're not screwing up the deal for everybody, that's an attractive thing for the market. So more of that.
Great, thank you. We have time for one burning question before we, yes, at the back.
Thank you very much. Very interesting panel. I'm Alex Moreira, by the way, with WRI. I'm just wondering, what is the role of advisory in green banks? How much proactiveness are you giving to the topic of, okay, there's a transaction, let's look at this carefully and see how we can squeeze efficiency out of it. And I'll give you an example. I'm based out of Miami, Florida. My roof was pretty leaky and I had to replace it. So when I replaced my roof, I also put solar panels and I financed the whole thing through the PACE financing mechanism, right? But no one came and did an energy audit, first of all, to determine, whether we could squeeze some efficiencies out of the energy that we consumed. And on the adaptation specifically, which tends to be less bankable, as we know, no one told me that if I secured the roof-to-wall connection by investing $5,000 more, I would get a break from insurance of $1,200 a year. I ended up doing that because I just pestered everyone and I asked questions and I went after it and so on and so forth. But that's a no-brainer, and that makes an additional investment in resilience really, it enhances the attractiveness of the whole thing. It's efficiency. It pays for itself. 4 years payback. It's no-brainer. So I'm wondering how much green banks how much attention they are giving to this part of it.
Well, I can start. I mean, resilience is such a hyper-local issue. And for us, for the Green Bank, for the Montgomery County Green Bank, market education is for sure a key part of our action plan. We right now are currently dealing with our developers and building owners where it's really hard to convince or educate them and show them that the cost of inaction, it's more than the cost of action. And the preventative approach is better than the reactive approach. It's really hard, but it's part of our role to work hand in hand with the county in this, in setting up the scenario for this market education. And at the same time, ideally move forward with financing mechanisms, policy, and regulations. It's not easy. It's going to take time. It's going to take concessional financing. It's going to take technical assistance, resources, so we can make the case and prove our theories. In your case, for sure, it's evident, and there's no more arguments to be made. But there's other resilience measures that need more time, like Rick was mentioning, more time to really show savings and really make the case. But I do think that green banks, and in our case in particular, we work very hard in not only providing and analyzing strategy for financing mechanisms, but really developing market education strategies. Because if we don't educate our markets and our communities, if we don't have people in our communities raising their hands saying, I'm facing this climate hazard, who can help me? What are the conditions that I need to really be more resilient and adapted to a changing climate? So education, it's key part of our strategy. And if we don't educate different industries, stakeholders, including our own governments, we will not get anywhere.
Can I add something quick? I know we're up against you all in reception. Was that a fortified roof by chance? To the fortified building standard?
No, adaptation is what needed to be done in order to make the whole house more resilient.
So the only reason I bring that up is because I think that whether fortified roof or understanding of that type of building resilience is understood by insurance models. There have been really compelling data, like we've cracked that nut. And that is such an important vein for us to continue pressing on for a whole slew of other resilience improvements.
Thank you. Okay, so to wrap us up, because we're at time, final question for all of you is, what are you most excited about in the next 12 months as you roll out these innovative strategies on adaptation and resilience? 30-second answers.
I'm excited for impact assessment on our market exploration phase.
Really excited to try and prove that you can pay for resilience improvements with energy cost savings, especially among vulnerable communities, and to really see where the market is going to call us in for near-term project finance.
I guess I'm most excited about proving the model works and having the funds flow into projects in Cambodia that benefit communities and the environment, and then really just proving the model, and then actually rolling and then taking up some of these opportunities in some of the bigger countries like Philippines, Indonesia, or Vietnam first. So yeah.
I'm most excited for the insurance sector. I can't believe we hadn't brought that up till Alex asked that question. But the insurance sector has a major role to play in pushing adaptation resilient interventions, and they're working their way toward doing stuff. Yeah, there's a snowball building there.
Awesome, thank you. Please join me in thanking our panel. Thank you, and I'm gonna hand it back to Doug to close us out.
Well, thanks everyone for waiting till the end of the amazing two panels. We're gonna have some cocktails, but I think the complication is that we have to get out of this room, go over there, they have to bring the stuff in, and then we can come back in. So there'll be a little bit of a transition period before the cocktails start flowing. Oh no. Okay, so it's totally changed. Great, even better. Go outside, there's some tables on the right next to the reception, the drinks are set up there. So thanks so much. And if you haven't sent us your email, well, I think we have all your emails. We have a mailing list for GBN, you're on it. And so looking forward to giving you more information going forward. Thank you. Thank you so much, Adele, that was awesome. That was great. Very